What if Dexter Morgan got caught in season 1? How much time would he spend in prison? Would he get life behind bars or even the death penalty? That's what we're going to find out by breaking down his crimes and the legal consequences he'd face. Dexter works as a blood spatter analyst for Miami's police department. But outside of work, he's living a double life. He's also a serial killer. The difference? He only kills people who he thinks deserve it. Murderers, rapists, and criminals who slip through the cracks of the justice system. His adoptive father, Harry Morgan, taught him a code to avoid getting caught. But no matter how careful he is, his actions are still illegal. In season 1, Dexter kills multiple people, covers his tracks, and operates outside the law. If the police figured out what he was doing and had solid proof, he'd be looking at several life sentences, or worse. In this video, we'll go over what crimes Dexter committed, what Florida law says about them, and how long he'd be locked up if he had been arrested this early on. Dexter isn't just a serial killer, he's also an expert at covering his tracks. He carefully chooses his victims, plans out his kills, and disposes of the evidence so that no one ever suspects him. But if he were caught, the law wouldn't care about his so-called code. He'd be facing serious prison time. Let's break down his crimes in season 1 and what the law says about each one. In Florida, first-degree murder is one of the most serious crimes. It's defined as killing someone with premeditation or committing murder while engaged in another felony. Dexter's murders are very much premeditated. He stalks his victims, learns their routines, and sets up elaborate kill rooms where he takes his time before delivering the fatal blow. Throughout season 1, Dexter kills multiple people, including Matt Chambers, a killer who ran people off the road and got away with it. Jaworski, a man who raped and murdered young girls. Valerie Castillo's husband, a murderer who drowned his wife. And several others, including criminals who slipped through the justice system. Each of these murders would count as first-degree murder under Florida law. One of Dexter's biggest skills is making sure there's no trace of his crimes. He doesn't just kill people, he dismembers their bodies, puts them in garbage bags, and dumps them in the ocean. He also makes sure to clean up his kill rooms completely, leaving no DNA or fingerprints behind. This is a huge crime under Florida law. Tampering with evidence is a third-degree felony, meaning it's punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. While this is a much smaller charge compared to murder, it would still add more years to his sentence. And considering how often Dexter does this, prosecutors could charge him for every single case where he destroyed evidence. Even though Dexter thinks he's helping law enforcement by killing criminals, he's also obstructing justice by removing bodies and covering up crimes. That alone would make him a major target for law enforcement. Dexter sees himself as someone who delivers justice when the system fails. But the law doesn't allow people to take justice into their own hands. In the US, vigilantism is illegal, and people who commit crimes, even against criminals, aren't excused just because they believe they're doing the right thing. In Dexter's case, his vigilantism isn't just about stopping crime, it's about killing people. That means he wouldn't just be charged for acting outside the law, he'd be tried as a dangerous criminal. Florida law doesn't have a specific charge for vigilantism, but prosecutors could stack charges against him, including unlawful imprisonment for kidnapping his victims before killing them, conspiracy if they argued he planned these murders in advance, murder with a special circumstance since he repeatedly killed under a pattern. All of these would add even more years to his sentence, making sure he never sees freedom again. Even though Dexter kills criminals, the legal system doesn't make exceptions for good serial killers. If caught, he'd be facing multiple life sentences and possibly the death penalty for first-degree murder alone. On top of that, tampering with evidence and other charges would add even more years behind bars. Now that we know the crimes Dexter committed in season 1, let's break down the legal consequences he would face under Florida law. If the police caught him and had enough evidence to convict, he would be looking at multiple life sentences and possibly the death penalty. Dexter's main crime is first-degree murder, the most serious homicide charge in Florida. This is defined as killing someone with premeditation or committing a murder while engaged in another felony. Since Dexter carefully plans his murders and kills in cold blood, every single one of his 13 murders in Season 1 would qualify as first-degree murder. Possible punishments for first-degree murder in Florida are life in prison without parole. This is the most common sentence for premeditated murder in Florida. If convicted of even one murder, Dexter would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Or death penalty. Florida allows the death penalty for first-degree murder if the prosecution can prove aggravating factors. Since Dexter is a serial killer, his crimes would almost certainly qualify for capital punishment. How many years would Dexter get? If the police could only prove one of Dexter's murders, he would get life in prison without parole. If they could connect him to multiple murders, he would either receive multiple life sentences or be sentenced to death. The fact that he targeted criminals wouldn't matter legally. Murder is still murder. Since Florida juries have sentenced serial killers like Ted Bundy to death, there's a strong chance Dexter would be executed if convicted. Dexter doesn't just kill, he also makes sure there's no trace of his crimes. He wraps his victims in plastic, drains their blood, and dumps their remains in the ocean. Under Florida law, this would count as tampering with evidence, which is a third-degree felony. Legal consequences for tampering with evidence in Florida are up to 5 years in prison per charge and up to a $5,000 fine per charge. Because Dexter has done this 13 times in Season 1, the prosecution could stack the charges against him. 13 counts of tampering with evidence times 5 years per count equals up to 65 extra years in prison. Total fines could reach $65,000. Even though this wouldn't compare to his murder charges, it would add extra time to his sentence. Even though Dexter believes he's making the world a better place, Florida law doesn't allow people to take justice into their own hands. There's no specific law against vigilantism, but Dexter's actions would lead to additional criminal charges, such as kidnapping, which is a first-degree felony. Since Dexter restrains and holds his victims against their will before killing them, each case could be considered kidnapping, which carries a life sentence. Unlawful imprisonment, which is a third-degree felony. If the prosecution went for a lesser charge, this could still add 5 years per victim to his sentence. How much extra time would he get? If charged with kidnapping, that's 13 life sentences, 1 for each victim. Even if the prosecution only pursued unlawful imprisonment, he could still get up to 65 extra years in prison. If Dexter were caught and convicted, his punishment would be severe. For the 13 counts of first-degree murder, he would receive either life in prison without parole or the death penalty. Since he is a serial killer, the death penalty would be a strong possibility in Florida. On top of that, for tampering with evidence after each murder, he could face up to 5 years per charge, adding up to 65 extra years behind bars. His habit of restraining and holding his victims before killing them could also lead to kidnapping charges, which is a first-degree felony punishable by life in prison per count. That means 13 additional life sentences stacked on top of his murder convictions. If prosecutors went for a lesser charge of unlawful imprisonment, he could still face up to 65 more years in prison. In the worst-case scenario, Dexter would be sentenced to death. In the best-case scenario, he would receive multiple life sentences with no chance of parole, ensuring he would never walk free again. If Dexter had been caught in Season 1, his fate would have been sealed. His 13 premeditated murders alone would have put him behind bars for life, or even sent him to death row. While he may have seen himself as a vigilante, the law doesn't make exceptions for moral serial killers. The justice system is black and white. Murder is still murder. Beyond the first-degree murder charges, Dexter would have faced tampering with evidence, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment charges, all of which would add decades, if not more, to his sentence. Even if the police couldn't prove every single one of his murders, just one conviction would have been enough to put him away forever. In the real world, serial killers with far fewer victims have been sentenced to multiple life sentences or execution. Given Florida's history with capital punishment, Dexter would likely have faced the same fate. So, what do you think? If Dexter had been arrested in Season 1, do you believe he would have escaped justice, or was his downfall inevitable? Do you think he deserved the death penalty, or should he have spent his life in prison? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos of your favorite shows and characters. Thanks for watching.